It's like we're in a card game, and I'm the scorekeeper. You get a good hand, and I give you 100 points. Where did it come from? It didn't come from anywhere. And if you lose 100 points, do I have more points now to give to somebody else? But no.
Leads right into your first deadly innocent fraud, which is the federal government must raise funds through taxation or borrowing in order to spend. In other words, government spending is limited by its ability to tax or to borrow. Now, that's the fraud. And Warren's going to tell us the solution, the reality.
So right now, that's been the case. It's starting to change, right, in the last 2 years because of modern monetary theory. But the biggest takeaway from modern monetary theory is what I just talked about. You know, governments are spending is not revenue constrained. Okay, you don't. You're spending first, okay, and then taxes get paid. So once you understand the sequence, okay, then all these issues of solvency and that's crowding out, that type of thing, they're not applicable anymore once you understand the sequence. The congressmen have the sequence wrong. They think the sequence is they've got to get dollars first before they can spend them. But the actual sequence is the taxpayer has to get dollars first before he can pay his taxes. So that overturns every economic mainstream model that's ever been put out.
Yeah, and literally overturns. It's backwards. Like up becomes down. Yeah.
They got G minus T equals this and all that. Everything in there is that based on, they have to get, there's an imperative to bring in dollars through taxing or borrowing to be able to spend. And the narrative was from President Obama. They say if you run out of money, when are we going to run out? We've already run out of money. We're not taking in enough in taxes. We have to go borrow from China, leave the debt to our grandchildren. To be able to spend.
China that can't create dollars, but the U.S. government can create dollars.
Right. The sequence is backwards. The sequence is the government spends first. China gets some of that money because we buy hair dryers at Walmart or whatever. And then they buy government bonds with some of that money after the money's already been spent. Okay, so we're not getting borrowing from China in order to spend. Okay, now, so that's a big MMT contribution that hasn't been in the history of thought. It's been implied a little bit if you go back to things people said. It's never explicitly been pointed out. Like, hey, you've got the sequence backwards. It's not how it works. Now the question is, what we also point out is that what the government does need, the limitations are what is offered for sale in exchange for dollars. You can't buy anything unless there's somebody out there selling it. So,
is that the Italian government calling?
Or the Russian government?
Right. So, why would anybody sell anything for dollars? Nobody sells anything looking for Confederate dollars. Richmond can have a big pile of those. You're not going to be able to buy anything. Okay. So where does the money story start? How does it come? And so we tell the money story different which incorporates the proper sequence. It begins with a tax liability. The critical part of the monetary system is the tax liability. Without that, there is no monetary system. And the dollar, the yen, those are the tax credits that satisfy the tax liabilities as described in the tax liability. So let's say the government puts a tax on everybody's house. They say, you owe us $10,000 or else you're going to lose your house. So number one, there's a tax liability. Number two, they tell you it's dollars. That's the tax credit.
The unit of measurement. Right.
Yeah, that you need, or else we're going to take your house away, burn your house down, whatever you're going to do. So the tax liability is critical. So when you see these MMT proponents saying taxes don't fund spending, well, tax liabilities fund spending, if you want to look at it abstractly. I mean, they don't provide the revenue that you need to spend.
But it gives value.
They provide things offered for sale that you need to be able to spend. And so the limits of government at any one time is what is offered for sale in exchange for dollars. And that's limited to the demand created by the tax liabilities. And if you want to buy more things than that, interestingly, you've got to do something different. One thing you can do is lower your prices. If the government decides to pay half for everything that it's been paying for, the tax liability is the same, it's going to get twice as much stuff. because the private sector needs the government's money to pay the tax. The government's telling it what it has to do to get it every time it spends. If you serve in the Army, I'll give you $50,000 a year. The total tax liability is $50,000 for the whole economy. It's going to get one soldier. It might get 1.5 if somebody wants to save. It's going to get one soldier. If it says I'm going to pay $25,000, it's going to get two soldiers. If it says I'm going to pay $100,000, it's going to get half a soldier. Get a part-time soldier, because they only need $50,000 as defined by your tax liability. So that's a critical piece of the understanding that gets sloughed over. The price level.
Can I repeat that back to you to make sure I got that correctly? So you're saying that you got the federal government. The federal government needs stuff, and it offers these tokens that are just something that it made up. And in order for people to need those tokens, they say, okay, we're going to tax you in those tokens, and the amount that they're going to tax reflects how much people are willing to work for that money, right?
Well, so the amount they're going to tax creates an absolute need.
Right.
So if you're the one guy being taxed, and they say the tax is 100 tokens, you have to come up with 100 tokens. You're going to lose your house, go to jail, or something. Right? And so if they say, okay, a car costs 100 tokens, you have to give them your car. If they say, 100 tokens is a half hour's work, then you don't have to work a half hour. They have what you need, and they tell you what you have to do to get it. They're pitching and you're catching. Mm-hmm. Not the other way around. And that's why I say the currency is a public monopoly. They've got it. You need it. They set price.
That fascinated me the first time I heard you say that, is that because the prevailing idea is that the market fundamentally sets prices. And what you're saying is that the government fundamentally sets prices because they're making the initial push of the money.
Okay, Any economist, who thinks hard enough, will tell you that markets only set relative value. They tell you, how much pizza is. If a guy gets paid $10 an hour, a pizza is going to cost $10. Because pizza is roughly an hour's work. In this market, they'll do a big study. The car is going to be $40,000. The person gets paid 10 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they'll tell you silver is going to be 100 times gold, something. But these models come up with relative value. They have no source of absolute value in terms of number of dollars. They just don't have it. There's no source of that information. The markets can only determine relative value. They need something to get started, and then the rest is relative value. So on the gold standard, you say, the price of gold, the government sets it $35 an ounce back. And then markets take that and run with it, and everything else is relative value. Today they might say, okay, gold's at 1,800, and then everything else is relative value. If you want to go back on gold standard, you got to give them some information. Okay, you got to tell them it's dollars. If you say, I meant yen, well then everything's 110 times higher, right? Mm-hmm. That's all they care about. They're just waiting for some. So the only information for absolute value has to come from the government. There's no other place it can come. And the mainstream models do not have a source of the price level. They have relative value, and you have to tell them what prices were yesterday, what your starting point is for prices. And they say, well, what's the source of the price level? They say, it's historical. It's an infinite regression back to before the Big Bang. And they don't have, and they just let it go. There's no, they don't have
there's no logical description to say, okay, this is where it came from.
Because they don't recognize the sequence. They got the sequence backwards. And so there can't be a price source of the price level if you got the sequence backwards.
And you mentioned it briefly that the government has the monopoly on the currency creation. I remember that was the clicking point for me for MMT. I can't remember which lecture it was or video that you had, and you had the sectoral balances chart up, and you were pointing out the fact that they're pretty much they're mirror images of each other. And
that's probably Stefan.
And that there's no, the reason that these are mirror images of each other is because there's only one source of the money. There's no other place for the money to come from because the government has the monopoly on the money creation. And I went, duh.
Well, the government has the monopoly on the thing that it demands for payment of taxes.
Right.
I can loan you $50 and you give me a note, and that note somebody's going to send you his money. It's like, okay, but it's not. You can't use it to go pay taxes.
Right.
And the banks are agents of the Fed, so that's why their dollars can be used to pay taxes. But the Fed, they're part of the system that the Fed has and Fed allows. Yeah.
Right. They have license basically from that. Right. Right. I wanted to get into fraud number 2. With government deficits, we are leaving our debt burden to our children.
Yeah.
Our great-grandchildren are going to be paying for this spending bill coming up. Right. Aren't they, Warren?
Right. So there's a couple of things. First of all, it's absurdity, right? Because, 20 years from now, our children, if they build 20 million cars, they're not going to have to send them back to 2021 to pay off the debt. Whatever they build, they can drive, and use. Whatever food they grow, they can eat. Whatever the GDP is going to get consumed by the people who are alive there. In real terms, nothing gets sent back in time. In real terms, whatever gets produced gets distributed. And that distribution is not controlled by what happened 20 years ago unless people in the future want it to be. They can decide, like the Europeans did, that we're not going to use that 3% limit anymore. We're going to 11. So, and of course, fiscal policy is almost entirely distributional anyway. Right? So we're always doing that. So whatever gets produced in in the future, it's going to get consumed by whoever's alive in the future, and there's nothing going back in time. So anything they are talking about this payback or anything can only affect the distribution of who gets to consume the future output. And that gets overridden and changed and modified and established continuously anyway. So there's no, for all practical purposes, there's no constraint on that either.
Right. Well, and then let me say the story that's typically told in more explicit detail, which is because the government has to borrow, which we already established it doesn't, but the government has to borrow $100 today, and it has to pay back $150 in the future. Therefore, the future kids, 20 years from now or whatever, when they're going about their work and they're going about their daily lives, when they're making their money, they have to come up with the burden of that extra $50 that their parents promised that they would pay.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning. So that goes wrong in the first or second phrase, and then that error gets compounded by the time you're at the end. So the first thing is the government borrows $100. So let's say it borrows it from you. You take your $100 and you buy a 3-month treasury bill. So now you own a 3-month treasury. So did you lose any money?
No. You gained money, right? I mean, imperceptibly, because, right?
Well, let's say the treasury bill's at 0 interest.
Okay. No, you didn't get any money.
Okay. But you didn't lose any money. So you already have the money. You already have that $100 that the government borrowed. It hasn't taken it away from you. It's just shifted it from one account at the Fed to another. The public debt, $28 trillion, already is dumb money. It's dollars in securities accounts at the Fed that have been moved from dollars in reserve accounts that were going to be there anyway. Okay? Because if the government doesn't borrow that $100, you personally might spend it, but then the next guy you bought something from is going to hold on to it. Right? Or if he doesn't, somebody, by 3 o'clock on that day when the banks close, the government has spent $100, somebody's still got it.
Right.
Okay, so it's going to be held by somebody anyway. It's not like it was going to be spent. Because if it was, it would have already been spent before 3 o'clock. It then goes into treasury securities, which, not that it matters that much, but they're entirely liquid. You can sell them to somebody else next day if you want. And so it's still the money. It's not like something other than the money. It never changes forms. What it is, it's in a different monetary aggregate. M1 includes checking accounts. It does not include dollars in securities accounts at the Fed. It's a Federal Reserve Bank. It's the bank account. M2 includes money in checking accounts and savings accounts. A savings account is a time deposit at a commercial bank like Bank of America. Okay? But it does not include dollars in time deposits at the Federal Reserve Bank, which is functionally an equal bank to any other bank. People have time deposits. So M2 excludes time deposits at the Fed, but includes time deposits at commercial banks. And so, you had, instead of lending your money to the government, $100, if you loaned it to Bank of America, They would have moved it from your checking account to your savings account. And nobody would have said, oh, that money's gone. They've taken that money away. They have to pay it back. It's all the money. Okay,
yeah.
Fine. When the Treasury moves it, they say, oh, that's gone. They have to pay it back. It's like, it's functionally inapplicable terminology.
Well, and that's actually what I wanted to bring up is that I think we're using the wrong words to describe this stuff.
Yeah, well, they're not wrong. They are what they are. If you get fooled by them, shame on you.
Okay, good point.
And it's not deliberate subterfuge, because there was a time under the gold standard where they were borrowing your gold. They did owe you gold.
Right.
And in 1934, they defaulted on that promise to give you gold. And you lost. That dollar was worth a lot less gold, and they had promised to give you more, and you're not going to get it. Okay, but we just left the terminology, so maybe it's an anachronism. Okay. And so the idea that the children already have the money now when it's borrowed. It's not like they're going to get it later.
Or they're going to have to owe it later. Yeah.
Or yeah, we're going to have to pay it back later. They already have it. It was never taken away. Okay, when you put your $100 in a treasury security instead of a checking account, you have it. In 30 years, you still have it. It's not being taken away. What can you do with it when it matures? You can put it back in your checking account. There's nothing else you can do with it.
Right.
The dollars only exist as numbers in bank accounts, basically time deposits or overnight deposits. And that's the only distinction we have. So we've offered terms attractive to people to move to term deposits. And in the future, if they want, they can move back to overnight deposits. But either way, they're going to have dollars in a bank account. Nothing's going to change. So that paying it back doesn't actually change anything. Now, it could have distributional issues, like you said, but
that's a different
matter. And distribution is always subject to political change.
Right. Well, and I want to emphasize that, because that was a big thing for me as well. Yeah. Is that instead of seeing this as okay, we're borrowing money and paying it back, and oh my God, we got to find the money, and what about the interest rate? And oh my God, is to say okay, the reserves and the treasury bonds are like a checking account and a savings account.
Right.
This one pays more interest, and it's time delayed. You can't.
Sometimes.
Well, yeah, sometimes it's time delayed, and you can't spend it immediately without converting it into your checking account, which is the reserves. But like you said, it's so liquid, you could do that at any time.
And nobody does,
right?
For spending, it's all investment companies that do that kind of thing,
right?
For liquidity and things like that.
So. Yeah, it's just money changing forms a little bit. It's not positive money and negative money.
Right. It's just moving from one type of bank account to another.
Right. So going back to whether or not our children are going to have this debt, that there is no debt in the sense that we're using the term. It's not like I borrowed $100,000 from you to build to buy a house. And I got to pay you $150 back, and if I don't pay it, you can come get my house because you're like, "Where's my money?" It's not that. It's completely different.
This is like if there's only one bank and you couldn't use cash, let's say Bank of America or something, Citibank, and you had $100,000 in a savings account. When it comes due, it goes into your checking account. They say, "All right, now what do you want to do?" They just paid you back. When Treasury securities come due, the Fed debits the securities account, credits reserve account, says, "Okay, what do you want to do next?"
And they do it with a push of a button. And that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's automatic now, right? But
it's a scorekeeper.
Yeah. Let's.
They're just the scorekeeper.
What's that?
They're just the scorekeeper problems.
Right. Actually, before I do number 3, can you tell the scorekeeping metaphor? Because I think that's a perfect way to describe what the Federal Reserve does.
Yeah. So it's like we're in a card game, and I'm the scorekeeper. You get a good hand, and I give you 100 points. Where did it come from? It didn't come from anywhere. And if you lose 100 points, do I have more points now to give to somebody else? Like, no.
Yes.
Or the scoreboard, should we, when you go to a Super Bowl and the guy kicks a field goal and we've used up all the points during the season, we can't give him any more points.
Right. We gotta go borrow points at interest.
It's like nonsense. It's not an applicable term. But so the Fed doesn't have any dollars. It doesn't not have any dollars. It spends by changing your numbers up. It taxes by changing your numbers down. It's just a scorekeeping.
Mm-hmm. The
whole thing's just a big scorekeeping exercise. It's a spreadsheet. You debit one account, you credit another. Account comes along and says, okay, you're in balance. The debits and credits are equal. Oh, they're not equal. You made a mistake. Go find the mistake.
Everyone, please like, comment, and subscribe to help us grow this channel. I think we cover a lot of good stuff. We're covering ideas that you're not hearing anywhere else. Economic ideas, historical ideas, systematic politics ideas you're not hearing anywhere else.